take a look at your website, your social media channels, really all your online channels, and ask yourselves those 3 questions. And if the answer isn't immediately obvious, then I think you need to go back and take another look at it, because you could be potentially losing out on lots of customers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the ProfileTree podcast. And today we are joined by Laura and Marcus and myself, Gabby. And we're going to talk about how, for businesses, building a brand is much just more than building a logo and coloring. It's about creating a brand that your customers can understand and trust. So, talking from my perspective, focusing on social media, really branding is one of the first things that I like to talk about with businesses I work with, because it's what your audience are going to recognize you from first. And because our attention spans are at 8 seconds, hopefully it doesn't get any worse than that, and how fast paced moving of an environment social media is, people can make a decision within seconds whether or not to keep looking at your content or to scroll away. So in terms of, say, just from a visual point, that's having your logo, your imagery style having the same, but the more consistency you have with that, so say if you have multiple platforms, ensuring that that is all the same across the board, that is going to help establish the trust from the very beginning. But Laura, in terms of, say, like with branding, are there any areas that you find maybe, say, like businesses don't focus on when it comes to it?
Yeah, I think one of the common mistakes is that people do just kind of focus on the visual, and it's an easy mistake to make too, because I think when you say the word branding to someone, the automatic assumption is that you're referring to things like their logo, their font, their colors, and kind of brand assets and things like that. But it's so much more than that. Your brand, as you said, is what people kind of recognize you by, whether that be on social media or website or even, traditional print advertising, things like that. But I think it's about everything that kind of comes before that. So probably an easy way to look at it is, before you even consider the visual elements, you need to be able to make 3 things clear with your brand. The number one thing, I think, is who your product or service is for. I think again, a common mistake is people trying to just appeal to everyone, but obviously know your customer persona, know your target audience, and make that clear with your branding. Secondly is what problem does it solve? So not simply about, we are this person and we sell this. It's about what exactly it can do for your customer. And again, when it comes to that, avoid using vague claims about what it can do or can't do. Like, give the potential buyer specific proof. So things like using statistics or case studies of like customer success stories are really, really helpful. And then thirdly, it's about, okay, well, why you as a business? What is your USP? And I think that can be maybe one of the hardest parts to identify. Um, but I think we've kind of seen hundreds of brands that maybe have really, for example, visually appealing websites and really nice design, but they don't make it clear what they're selling and who should buy it. So if you are a business that's either sort of setting up your brand, or you want to assess your existing brand, I would say a really good starting point is to take a look at your website, your social media channels, really all your online channels, and ask yourselves those 3 questions. And if the answer isn't immediately obvious, then I think you need to go back and take another look at it, because you could be potentially losing out on lots of customers.
No, I totally agree. And even say, like you were saying about, like, in terms of explaining how your product works, having the statistics, I think we're all at that stage now that with the resources we have online, that if we don't know how it works, we will find out if you don't tell us, whether that's good or a bad perspective. Marcus, for obviously from a website point of view, are there any, say, like branding elements you find businesses get wrong, or are there kind of any key components you think they should focus on?
Well, I suppose to establish a baseline, starting off with the kind of aesthetics, you certainly want to establish a color palette for the site and stick to it as well. Make sure that you have maybe a primary, secondary, accent, and a few neutrals. And yeah, just make sure then that you've defined out your colors as kind of variables, so that you aren't using 12 different shades of blue across the entire site. You want to keep consistency. It's generally fairly easy to do that, but there are certainly still some websites that make that kind of falter. And an important thing to keep in mind, which can be quite difficult for existing brands, is contrast and accessibility as well. Often when we see brands using maybe soft palette colors with white text layered on top, for example, it will feel accessibility markers when it comes over to the website side of things. So yeah, sometimes a bit of adaptation needed to make sure that the contrast between backgrounds and foreground text need to make sure that's nice and sharp. Same goes for buttons and other calls to action as well. When it comes down to typography, more and more people tend to just use the one type of font on their website these days. Sometimes two, one for headings and one for body text, but more and more are just using a singular kind of simple kind of font style that's easy enough read in both kind of bold heading format and smaller 16 pixel to 18 pixel kind of text as well. An underrated part of branding is spacing and kind of how consistent the layout and kind of structure is as well. If you have nice generous kind of either white space or kind of blank space in between all of your sections, it can really make a brand feel quite premium, and it feels calm and easy to kind of scroll through and browse through the site. But the moment things get cramped, or this section has lots of spacing, this one has none because it looks like this wording was trying to be cramped in, and then it starts looking out of place, and it feels like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and it doesn't look like it's all done with the same kind of goal or kind of same kind of design in mind. It looks a bit chopped and changed. So those are definitely some baseline ones, but echoing what Laura talked about, messaging tone and your values certainly comes into the website side of things too. So, thinking about how your brand kind of talks to them, are you going to be more, warm and casual? Are you going to be precise and professional? Think about who your audience is that's going to be landing on your website, and then keep that same kind of voice when it comes to headings, call to actions, even error messages and confirmation emails, which often get forgot about. And keeping that same tone and the same kind of way of speaking essentially throughout is a good deal of effort to get all of those little things. But if you're clear essentially about what you kind of stand for and who you are, then you just need to say it plainly at that stage, and people will be able to connect with a business that's a lot more transparent about how you want to approach a certain problem or how you want to advertise yourself then at that stage. And yeah, the small copy will really matter. Like even looking at something simple like a 404 page, or you'll get something like it just says error 404. That's it. But some websites you'll go onto and they'll say, oops, we can't quite find what you're looking for. Maybe you want to check here. Even that slight wee change in approach, people will kind of miss out on. So, yeah, those wee bits of details really become important.
Yeah, I think you made a really good. I was exactly thinking of 404 pages, Marcus. Like branding is a great opportunity for creativity and originality, and taking something that's okay, well, yes, this is the thing that's usually done, but it's like, well, how can we actually incorporate our brand voice and our tone into other aspects of our marketing, whether that be, the way you present your website. And ultimately it has to tie into everything you do as a business. So for example, if you do have that, very polished professional tone across all of your marketing channels, that should also be the way, for example, you deal in terms of communications and customer service. Or if it's a wee bit more lighter, a little bit more fun, again, it's a good opportunity. If you're, sending standard template emails, make those kind of lighter and fun as well. And not everyone necessarily has that creativity, but maybe that's where you might want to look at employing a branding or a design agency to kind of look at all these aspects with you.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, Marcus, you made a good point in terms of like the accessibility element of it, because even I can't remember what brand it was, but recently I saw a brand that put out an Instagram. It was a statement on an Instagram story, but it was something like a pale blue background with very small text and white. And I remember trying to read it, thinking, is my eyesight getting worse, or can I just not read this text? So it's not even. It's kind of making sure the accessibility goes across the board. And I think you're both also right in terms of say adding that bit of, personality to your branding. Because I think there's one website I've used that their 404 page, when you go onto it, it's like, oops, someone made a mistake and is currently in trouble because this page doesn't work. Where that feels a bit more, because that's the kind of style they have across their website. You're like, oh, okay. Whereas if you just went into a broken page, you're not going to have that same impact. But I think you both kind of pointed out a good point in terms of, say, when it comes to branding, that it isn't just about the visuals, it's about your values being shown, not only say on your website, and it's also in terms of, say, like your marketing with social media. And that, like, say from that, what I always kind of think is that if your brand or your business has strong values that you want your customers to know, you want to kind of show that visibly rather than just having, say, like a written mission statement on your website, and that comes through in terms of like you said, like the language you use, the way, even say, for example, you build your community on social media in terms of how you respond to comments or questions. But I think as well, if say for sometimes a mistake I see for a lot of businesses is that maybe if they haven't outlined their views, say for example, if there's a certain cause and they make a social media post about it, sometimes it can feel a little bit performative, that, or even just kind of slotted in to meet a criteria that everyone else is doing. I was going to ask for either of you, would say if you saw like a business say that put up, say something like in terms of a value post, if it didn't feel kind of connected to their content, would you feel that same kind of way of feeling that just looks like it's been placed in rather than feel it's coming directly from the business?
Yeah, I would say the key thing is consistency. So is the as to use your example, is the post that's connected to some sort of value, do I sort of connect that with the brand in terms of how I know the brand to date? Because I think mission statements or values are really, really important. But I do think they can also be used as a bit of a tool, in terms of saying like, oh, well, this is what we do. And it's kind of like you have to practice what you preach. It's all well and good having a really nice sounding page on your website that basically, demonstrates your mission statement and what your core values are as a company. But if you don't live by them, then it's kind of, as you said, Gabby, it's performative.
Mm,
It's trying to kind of connect with a particular community or an audience. And I think what brands maybe forget is that consumers are going to see through that. They're going
mm,
to see it as, oh, you're just doing that because it's like relevant, or because it's like it's something that's being talked about right now. You're just effectively doing it for, likes and shares and clicks and things. So I would say I definitely appreciate it whenever businesses um demonstrate whatever their values may be. But I will certainly be cynical if I think it's drastically different to what I've seen of them online before.
I definitely echo that too. We're definitely all aware of how cynical a place the online world can and will be. There was certainly a period of time, even going back, uh, as even past the past what 10 years maybe or
Mhm.
so, where we've kind of seen that shift of particularly larger corporations, trying to get that kind of appeal. Particularly we see it very often with kind of younger demographics as well. But it's as you said, there needs to be a consistency about how you kind of present yourself, both over time and over all of your platforms, as we kind of discussed. If you're putting out these quirky kind of posts on Instagram, but then people churn over to one of your other platforms and see you be quite serious. I mean, that's giving off quite mixed messaging. You might want to appeal, to different demographics, of course, but are you splitting the wickets rather than focusing in on who your actual core demographics should be? I'll not pretend to, as a developer, to understand those kind of things, but I certainly see that, and I kind of I wonder, and it gives me that doubt. So I suppose just by assumption, I would imagine everybody else would have the same.
Yeah, it's kind of like say like for me, like a brand that I would think of that I think is consistent in terms of their values is, say, like for example, like Ben and Jerry's, where they always talk about the causes they work with, are always very vocal about what they support and things like that. Whereas, and I think that's as well as, I think for like say small businesses, they think that maybe big brands don't make mistakes when it comes to their branding. Like an example I saw recently, now it's from an older campaign. Unfortunately, it's from BlackBerry, and I miss my BlackBerry phone, but they had put out a campaign, and it was like on Twitter or X, and they had talked about how better BlackBerry is than say other phones. But if you looked at the bottom, it said sent from iPhone for Twitter or Twitter for iPhone, and they're like, so you posted a BlackBerry promotion from an iPhone kind of thing. But it's like you said, if you can, I think Marcus, there was a point you made there that if you can't keep consistent with your values, like even an example of a small business I've seen do it really wrong, and I think I've actually maybe mentioned it on a previous podcast episode as well. Was there was a girl in Scotland, I think she's maybe a micro influencer, and she'd put up a video on TikTok about something she was upset about, and she was left a comment that said, "Would you ever grow up and stop crying on the internet?" That comment was left from a mental health support business. And all as soon as I saw that, and you just saw everybody jump on it, and it just like you're not, you have to practice what you preach. So if you're not keeping consistent, even in terms of how you interact with other people, it will be visible, for others to find it.
Yeah, do you know what I think? A really good example of a brand leaning into the brand and everything that they do is Ryanair.
Yeah.
So, when you think of Ryanair, you think of it's cheap and maybe cheerful. It's functional. They are a budget airline, and they kind of don't purport to be anything else. Like, so obviously constantly people are online, sharing posts about like, oh, why didn't you seat us together? Why didn't I get a window seat? And they just lean into that. They'll just reshare it and say, well, you didn't get a window seat because you didn't pay for a window seat. And I actually think that it then ends up being quite endearing and it's funny. And you can go, well, yeah, right enough. They are right. Why did they? So like that's an example of what could be perceived as negative for a brand. They're taking it and they're running with it, and they're actually getting more engagement and probably more followers and potentially more customers out of it. So I think what people forget is there's so much opportunity with brand, whether it be in terms of the visuals or the creativity or the messaging or the tone of voice. And they're kind of missing out on that by just looking at, the pure like physical design.
Yeah, because that's the thing is that say like, I think we're in a world now on social media where you find a lot of what's known as rage bait content, where it's people doing something incorrectly. So you can sit there frustrated that they're doing something incorrectly. And I think, in a way, right, say like your example, Ryanair, I think that's a good example of how someone takes a bit of negativity and flips it with a bit of humor, but it takes the focus away from the negative element and kind of flips it to be a potential, outcome from it. But I think as well in terms of branding, and that's again it, and it's not even just down to content. It's even like where we've mentioned in terms of like the visual component is say like whether it's say like on your website or on social media, that having that consistency to reduce confusion, because we don't have the attention span anymore to, so the way I explain it to say businesses I work with is you want to make sure that in the few seconds that someone goes from your website to your social media presence, that they don't have to question, am I on the right page? Because that 2 second of hesitation could potentially you losing a reoccurring customer or even just a single off sale. So I think that when it comes to branding, even say for businesses that are just starting off, I think there has to be a good level of planning into it in terms of the visuals, what the company stands for, and what you want to make kind of public, whether that's on your website or on social media as well.
Yeah, it's probably like if you were in someone's house and you went from their living room to their kitchen, like, do you still feel like you're in the same person's house, or is it totally different? You're like, I stepped out somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, and I think we've kind of talked about this a wee bit as well, but um, what I think again another opportunity with brand is to actually build, as we would say, brand trust with customers. It's something that can probably be a lot easier to lose than it can be to build. But again, there's so many opportunities within it. So having, a clear and credible and consistent and recognizable and understandable brand is obviously a big factor in building brand trust with customers. And I think what people forget is not every customer is just necessarily going to go for the cheapest option. If you've built up that brand trust, that can then sort of turn into brand loyalty. So someone might go back to you as a business because they're like, well, I had a really good experience before. Everything online was really clear and understandable. Their website was easy to use, customer service was great. And that's kind of what's going to translate into, paying a little bit more versus going to the next cheapest competitor. Um, and branding all feeds into that, and obviously building that brand trust.
Yeah, for sure. Because, like, say for example, it's like you said, like trust now is such can be such a fleeting thing. Whereas I know even myself that say like I go to the same same Etsy shop to get my like say my Apple Watch straps when they kind of break because I know I've had a good experience. So I don't even consider looking anywhere else anymore. I just go back to the person I know I've had that good experience with. And I think even in terms of the trust, just kind of coming back even to social media, I think that's why, user generated content is such a big driver now for brands where you don't have to have that overly polished promotional video that you've had to pay, a lot of money for to say like use a professional studio and things like that. We say as consumers, we want to see the real product in someone real's hands that yes, say for and I think we're say like even with the trust, sometimes even just using TikTok as an example, sometimes even with user generated trust, user generated content, there could be a little bit of error with trust because and I think this is maybe a mistake sometimes brands make that I've seen people promoting products, but there's something you can do in TikTok where that brand can then take your video and use it as an ad for themselves. So then you could be watching someone, say like an influencer that you trust, but then if you all of a sudden see it's an ad, that can sometimes make it a little bit less trusting, so definitely I would say, for businesses that are looking to move into that, making sure that there's a nice mix of purely organic user generated content. Whereas if there's opportunity, say, for pushing out a bit further to build more trust with a wider audience, that's when you should take that opportunity. But I was going to ask Marcus, in terms of say like with branding of websites and just even say from your experience, have you ever find that say certain websites where the branding maybe isn't consistent, say maybe for example like an e-commerce website, that there is maybe say a drop in the sales funnel that could potentially be caused by that?
Yeah, there can be a few factors kind of feeding into that because sometimes the design and the way that people interact with the site can kind of meld into one, depending on how you do things at times. And if you start to kind of obscure the kind of user journey or make it difficult for people to just get to what they want to find or guiding them through, giving them a simple way to find things of interest for them, um, then yeah, it can definitely become a bit of a brick wall for people because you'll get different types of customers coming onto a website. You'll get some people coming onto the site, and it could be, as you'd mentioned before, perhaps if you're a repeat customer, you've already bought before, you just want to find what you got last time. Okay, right. How do you do that? Do you need to make them go look? Are you relying on the browser finding it for them? If they log in, can they go see their past orders nice and quickly so that they can find what they ordered before? If assuming it's some sort of, either consumable or some repurchasable kind of product. If there's any kind of functionality to show, oh, you recently looked at this or you recently bought this, and you'll often get that with even on things like, Just Eat or Delivery, you'll get that all the time for things that you frequently ordered. Amazon does the same thing for things that have subscriptions tied to them for those types of products too. So trying to get all of these easy wee points so that people don't have to go really searching that long if they already know what they want and want to come back for it in particular. Because repeat customers is really, really, really good for a brand. Now, when it comes to new customers, they will have two different things. They might just want to have a browse. Maybe they heard about the site or they've just come across it and they want to go have a little scroll through the catalog. Cool. Make that nice and easy for them. Design wise, let them see more, get 2 products per column on mobile, make it easy for them to see everything and swipe between everything. And then when it comes to kind of searching or prompt, then yeah, get your brand in and with clear designs whenever they first land on the site. Do you have something on sale? Cool, show it. That matches in with all of the branding that they've maybe seen till now. Maybe they got it for a social media post. So it can all influence someone, and well, I suppose rather than influence, just give them the confidence really. And as you said, then things like real kind of content, user generated kind of content around products can be quite important, and you'll see that very often on product pages in the form of reviews. Um, Obviously, simple written word review is quite good at getting, if your site has the traffic for it and the product's sold enough, and you can automate out some review emails a few weeks after delivery, then that could be quite good. And some even go as far as including customer imagery and videos as well, which can achieve that too.
Yeah, because I've definitely seen, I can't think of the top of my head what websites, but I've definitely seen, I think it's maybe sometimes more skincare websites where you'll see if you go into the product that, say, for example, if you scroll down where the reviews are, they'll maybe have like their Instagram feed or product or say like customer photos that, say you can
Yeah,
see
other
the
tags or
branding.
something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if it's user, my kind of most frustrating thing, say, especially as a new customer to websites, is if I've like filled my cart, gone to create an account, and then but when it refreshes, your cart's empty, and you're thinking,
Oh,
I don't remember a single thing I put in there, and I don't have the time to go back and put it in.
They're usually
Um,
fairly good on that one, but it can happen on some older websites, yeah.
n- so I was going to say if you had maybe a question, and I'll answer this myself as well. But if either, or say I'll go maybe Laura with you first. If there was one maybe piece of advice that you had for say whether it's established businesses or new businesses when it comes to branding, what would your advice be?
probably just to hark back to what I said at the start, where before you create anything visual, before you consider about, setting up channels or whatever it might be in terms of your digital strategy, ask yourself, sort of who what, and why, in terms of who are you trying to reach as customers? What is it that you're not just what are you going to sell to them? What are you going to do for them? I think people have to, see it as a problem and solution type situation. And again, what is your USP? What makes you stand out? And why should customers buy from you over competitors? And I think it can be really difficult to define a USP that's actually original. So many become generic and it's like, oh, high quality service or competitive price. And it, obviously all of those things are really, really important and it's excellent if that is the case. But if it doesn't necessarily make you stand out from your competitors, it's not going to help you convert those sales. So yeah, that's what I would be thinking before any designs are drawn up at all.
I would 100% agree, I think, with everything you said there. From my point of view, say just focusing on social media because I sometimes find a lot of businesses, whether say it's some business I've worked with before or just you just see it in general day to life, that um, you can sometimes tell that businesses maybe don't see the value in social media when it comes to their branding and their content. What I would say on that point is that when it comes to your social media presence, it's your branding that is going to turn attention into trust. So if people find you on social media and recognize you, they can and understand what you stand for, and that feels consistent across all your channels. They're far more likely to not only remember your business, believe in your business and what you stand for, but ultimately choose you as their go-to for that service or that product. And Marcus, what would your advice be? Maybe more regards to probably web design, but what would your advice be?
Well, I suppose as a more general one, giving everything that we've kind of discussed today, that a brand isn't just one big statement, it's 100 kind of small decisions made the same way every time, essentially. So once you kind of can, lock in what your values, your goals, and what your brand kind of is, into your kind of strategy, then, hopefully the brand can look after itself as you adapt to changes in social platforms, ways that you want to treat your website, ways the business maybe changes or how your demographic changes, then, things can still change over time. There's nothing set in stone. But if you can set your kind of strategy and your brand in stone, then it can hopefully take care of itself a lot better along the journey.
That's great. I think that's a great piece of advice. Well, thank you both very much for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this episode. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for future episodes, and don't forget to let us know in the comments what you'd like us to cover next.